Join Time Magazine's lead education reporter alongside global educators and advocates to explore the impacts of teaching forgiveness.
I teach forgiveness because it can have a positive impact in my students' families.
It helps my students thrive in the face of adversity.
Students who can forgive are happier.
Join us to hear from teachers and thought leaders on how and why to include forgiveness in your classroom.
Temperature rise will bring widespread devastation and unprecedented extreme weather.
New coronavirus cases emerge across the country.
Obesity rates have more than doubled in kids.
Cape Town is running out of water.
Welcome everyone to our session today entitled Play, Learn, and Thrive. We are honored and thrilled to have you join us. You're certainly in for some fun. But before we get started, a little housekeeping. I want to remind you to share what you're hearing and learning on social media using the World EduWeek hashtag. Also, we hope that our session will generate some questions from you, and we welcome you to share your questions with us in the chat. And at the end, we'll set aside some time to answer them. Next, you're probably wondering who I am. My name is Karen Clune, and I've spent most of my life working in the intersection of innovation and global health. And it wasn't until I met today's speaker that I extended that experience and that interest to education. I proudly sit on the board of Learn to Play, and my 3 children have all thrived under its curriculum. Okay, but now onto the show and what you're here for. So early childhood development. You know, a former US president once said that there's never such a thing as a senior in learning. In other words, you're never too old to learn. And I think the reverse is true as well. You're never too young to learn either. In fact, the younger, the better. I think we all know how important the first years of life are. This is when brains grow and connect at exponential speed. And we need to support this growth with proper healthcare, nutrition, security, and playful interaction. And all of this is needed to nourish developing brains and fuel growing bodies. These early years are truly a critical window of opportunity that helps shape the trajectory of a child's development and really build a foundation for their future. But unfortunately, only half of youth have access to early childhood development opportunities worldwide, and this percentage drops substantially in low and middle income countries. Today, you'll hear about a simple, effective model that has been developed for early childhood development that can be done anywhere, from refugee camps to cattle posts to urban neighborhoods. This model leverages the power of play and capitalizes on the nurturing caretakers in a community by giving them tools that they need to support and engage children and parents, and in the end, enabling entire villages to thrive. You'll hear about a 5-ingredient recipe for impact based on our experience in working in partnership with communities around Botswana. We hope you'll be able to take these ingredients back to your respective countries and empower communities and children to thrive and play. And now you'll see this model in action through a short video that we'll have to play.
Dumela, I'm Priyanka and I'm the founder of Learn to Play. My background is in literacy and remedial education, but about 8 years ago, I ventured into the world of early childhood education. I did this because of the increasing urgency I was seeing in my work here at RAVA, but also as I became a mum. I have 2 children, they're 6 and 3, and they've both been to school here at RAVA. And I want every child to have the same start in life that they have had. I don't want their access and their opportunities to quality early learning to be a luxury. So at Learn to Play, we harness our experience in using the power of play to create high-impact, sustainable, and scalable early childhood solutions for children aged 0 to 5, whilst also uplifting women's economic opportunities. We do this by training mothers as the key change agents in our communities. They deliver our playgroups. We also coach parents in responsive and nurturing care. But our secret to success, honestly, are the communities that we work with. This is my Botswana. These are my people, and they are my why. And it is with them that I am passionate about cultivating communities of opportunity and vibrant villages.
We do our personals, more carbon. I salili nane wolele le simolotse ngwaga le mongwe ke me pedi tse tshitiletse o itela gore jana bana ba ba hitile ka ithutego tsa ga ba tsena ka kwana o ka re ga ba basha ba tla ba le temogela ba setse ba tlwaetse o ka kgaogana le botsadi ka nako e e rileng ke ithutile go lo gontsi ke ithutile go lo gontsi ka gore rona bomme ba Setswana re betsa bana
ha ngwana sa utlwisa tlhotlhwa go mpotse yaanong mo sekolong se sa rona o rutile gore ngwana o na le maikutlo a gagwe a ene a le mo go wena re hela re ithuta gore ngwana o na le maikutlo o na le ditshwanelo tsa gagwe se ke se itumeletseng thata ke go thutswe ka go itse ngwana
se sengwe gape ke gore kana ga re na le bana mo sekolong go na le batlhokomedi mme batlhokomedi bao ba tswa mo motseng one wa Kabini ga ba tswa mo motseng wa Kabini ba jang ke bomme go na le mo go teng women empowerment
to go tshameka ke mo lenaneo le le thusang bana ba le bantsi se la tirela le thuse la tile go le bontsi ka gore gona ana la tile go ipaakanyetsa lekwalo la gago bala bosupa.
I think for me, just day to day, being a part of Learn to Play and knowing what I'm doing, as fulfilling as it is, I'd also like to believe that it is a part of my calling. You go out there and you firsthand see the impact that the program has on everyone within the communities, from Little Einsteins where it started, all the way down to the furthest community, to the youngest person, to the Khosis, to the mamapreneurs, to uncles, to caretakers, to caregivers that bring children to school.
2021 marks a transition into a social enterprise where we have merged our preschool with Learn to Play to create further impact, where paid early learning will help to fund free early learning. We're also deepening our impact within our existing communities and playgroups by creating an integrated approach. This means that Learn to Play will be focusing not just on early learning, but health, nutrition, protection, and responsive and nurturing caregiving.
ebile ga ne ile gore ke ketso ya me hela go ya ka nna gomo rona Batswana road hela e se ya nna mo motse wa Kabimba hela a re amogele lenaneo le ha ile gore le kata le lebagane le motse wa rona mme re lebile gore go bo hello re tla roba.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Well, now that you've seen a glimpse of what the model is and how it works, I want to introduce its founder, our speaker today, Priyanka Handaram. Priyanka is a social entrepreneur, a children's author, and truly an education leader who is pioneering programs that transform how the world educates, protects, and cares for young children. Priyanka is the founder and director of multiple early childhood organizations in Botswana, including Learn to Play. She's been awarded the title of Changemaker of Botswana for her work in education and is a global leader for young children through the World Forum Foundation. Her schools and programs have been showcased on global programs for their impact, including an early learning COVID-19 response rooted in play and well-being. But some of her most rewarding work has been training and working with young people, teachers, and parents across Africa. And with that, I welcome Priyanka.
Sorry, I'm going to try that again. Thank you so much, Karen, and good afternoon, and Dumela, everyone. I am so honored and thrilled to be here today and to share a little bit more about Learn to Play. So I want to first start by thanking you for taking time out of your schedules to join us and learn about how we work in communities for community impact and engagement. I'd also really like to thank the T4 team and World Education Week organizers for highlighting this as an important theme. I think community work and really, engagement with parents and caregivers is something that is really close to our heart. And the 5 steps that I'm going to share and how and why we came to get there. So thank you so much for acknowledging and highlighting this as an important theme. So today our session is Play, Learn, Thrive, which is really our mission and mandate at Learn to Play. And for our 5 steps, the first one is to co-create with your community. It is to take a human-centered design approach, and we hear this as a buzzword all the time, but what does that really mean? For us at Learn to Play, we are a community-focused organization. There is that fantastic African saying, it takes a village to raise a child. We really try and make that saying come alive. And that is by identifying who all the key players are in our context, not just the beneficiaries, who are obviously our children, the clients, who are our parents, but also the decision makers and the influencers in the community. So that could be village chiefs or government officials, social workers, primary school teachers, health workers, child protection officers, the police, anybody that is somebody of influence and a key decision maker in the community. These are all the people who are key players in our playgroup model. We didn't know this when we started. We learned this the hard way. So when we first started, we went into communities with this exciting offering that we thought, this will be the solution to providing free early childhood education in communities across Botswana. And as we started to work in these communities and really wanted to make an impact to the children, we realized how important it was to actually include all these players into our discussions. So now when we start a playgroup, before we even begin, we actually first engage in community mapping exercises with all these community leaders, the relevant partners, other professionals, even other competitors in the community or in the wider community around us. We start by doing focus group discussions, one-on-one interviews with parents. And what we really want to understand there are their struggles, their successes, their dreams, what are their hopes and visions for the future, for their village. We find out from village leaders if they've got village development plans and visions for how they want to grow in their communities. And we use these priorities of theirs to actually create our program to be unique to their solution. So this helps us to tailor our model to each community's individual needs. I want to encourage you, if you're working in a community, and a school is a community, so if you're a teacher, an educator, a head teacher, or a community worker, I want to encourage you to think about who all the key players are in your context. So take that question number 1 that's on the screen and think about not just the beneficiaries and the clients, which is usually the parents and the children, but everybody else that might play a role, that might be influential, and that might be able to give you a clue on how best to create a solution to best meet the needs of your community. Once you've done that, write down 3 open-ended but focused questions. Open-ended, so not yes or no questions. I mean, we first went in asking, do you want a playgroup? And of course, the answer was a resounding yes in every community that we went to. But when we started our playgroups, I think what they understood as a playgroup and what we understood as a playgroup were different. So and this is why I encourage you to open-ended but focused questions that you could ask that would truly help to create a solution that meets the community's needs. Really try and think about what you need to know before you even begin. So do you need to get in depth and know about cultural values? Do you need to know about what games are already played? What early childhood solutions already exist? Maybe there are informal babysitting services. Maybe there's a daycare that you don't know about. Maybe this is all in the early childhood context. So whatever your context is, thinking about the questions or the information that you need to know, and then using that to form some questions that you could ask. So that would be our first step, or our first point in our recipe of our secret sauce to success. The second is to start with children and parents in mind. I mean, when we're working in education, we very often tend to think about teachers and children. And very rarely do we start to think about parents. And I think for us, that has been a really very steep and big learning curve, is that especially with young children under the age of 5, it is impossible to create solutions without involving and engaging and supporting the parents and the families that we work with. We know that all parents want their children to be healthy and happy, but what healthy and happy looks like in each context is also different. We use the nurturing care framework as the foundation for all the work that we do. So the nurturing care framework is this incredible kind of, it's pictured here on the screen, this incredible framework developed by the WHO to guide early childhood practitioners on what they should be thinking about as they create programs for early childhood development. And it covers good health, adequate nutrition, responsive caregiving, safety and security, and opportunities for early learning. So when we started Learn to Play, we were really focused just on that red area, on opportunities for early learning. And we almost neglected the other 4 areas. And I say this in complete transparency to say, that was our area of expertise and our area of strength and passion. But like I said, very quickly realized that without focusing on those other 4, at least to some extent, or building knowledge, building support, building referral systems in those areas, it would be impossible to create a high quality early learning program. Children do need to be healthy and happy before they can learn. So again, here, I want you to draw out your beneficiary, and I want you to make this as visual as possible. Close your eyes if you need to, take a moment to meditate on it and think about your beneficiary. So your beneficiary is the child, of course, and the client is the parent. And so starting with them in mind, start with the basics. What do they look like in your community or the community where you're working? So at Learn to Play, we work across 5 different communities. I would have to do this process 5 times over because each community is different. And when I think about a child in a refugee camp in Jukwi in central Botswana versus a child in Gaborone in the capital city, that child looks different. When I think about a parent in Kavimba, the way they dress is different to the way a parent in Hopong, which is the southernmost tip of the country, to the northernmost tip of the country. So when I think about what they're wearing, what did they do today, where they live, one is on the banks of a river, the other is in the middle of a desert. What does their home and community look like? So really start to draw that out. And this is why I want it to be visual for you. Put the colors in there, get a feel, put texture in if you can. And when you think about your beneficiary and client, what are they thinking about today? What is on their mind? What are their stresses? What are their challenges? What are their dreams? What are their visions for the future? What is their most urgent need? This is the thing that if they had a magic wand and if they could have this fulfill their desire today, what is that most urgent and immediate need? But also, what are their more future needs? And early childhood development is in for the long game. We know that 90% of the brain develops by the time a child is 5 years old. And so what we do in these first 5 years is critical for lifelong success and learning and well-being. So what are those future needs and how can we fit them into our early childhood programming? It's also important to think about their culture, their values, but also how these are evident. How do they show up in their daily lives, in their routines, in their food, in their education, in those priorities and dreams? How is their culture and their values evident in what they're visioning for themselves? It's important to think about what makes them feel happy, what makes them feel sad, what upsets them and makes them angry or frustrated, those challenges and frustrations within their day-to-day lives and communities. What excites them about their future? What fills them with hope? And it's all of those questions that you can start with in terms of your visioning and your practice before you go into a community, but those are the kinds of questions that you might also want to think about asking when you start doing your community mapping, when you start doing your focus groups. What are they thinking about? What makes them feel happy? And these emotions are really important. When we talk about priorities and needs, maybe it is health and nutrition. Maybe actually their most immediate need is safety and security. And if that is their most immediate need, then early learning is actually not their most significant pressing need. And this is why it's important to look at that nurturing care framework and incorporate it into your community mapping exercises. So when you're looking at who your key players are in the community as well and who you should be engaging with, it's important to look at the nurturing care framework especially when dealing with young children, to involve a healthcare worker, somebody involved in child protection, any other teachers and educators involved, any other people that are responsible for motivating parents in the community, like village chiefs, or in Botswana we have something called a VDC, a Village Development Committee. They are integral to our program success. because they're the kind of glue that holds the community together. So these are all the people that we need to think about, and questions that form around these services are the questions that you need to be thinking about when you start engaging with communities. But really start to get a picture about your beneficiaries and your clients in as much detail as possible. And we've got a quote there from a parent in the refugee camp where we work that says, "I wish for my child to feel free, to feel that they can fly." And I've put that there because I think if I had interviewed a parent, which I have in other communities, their wish is not necessarily freedom, but a parent in a refugee camp, that is their wish. So when we're creating the program for the refugee camp, we've actually put in a lot of mindfulness in there to help build in some of these more social and emotional components into our curriculum, because for them it's a lot about their feelings, to feel that they have hope, to feel that they will have freedom, and as parents is to feel that they can fly. Whereas in some of the other communities where freedom is not a pressing need, their wish for their child might be more specific to a component within the nurturing care framework. Our third step in our recipe, of our secret sauce, is to celebrate the local environment and culture. We find that there is often great wisdom to traditional cultural practices, to the games and songs and stories, and we found that we can contextualize these to current research on early childhood development. And what's amazing is when we work with caregivers and parents and we tell them, oh, this incredible game you play with stones in Botswana, and it's a traditional Tswana game, that is actually mathematical development. They've never seen it in that light. And so we match what is historically or culturally or traditionally used in the communities to educational pedagogy and link it together in our curriculum. This is great because it gives further buy-in from community leaders and families, but also for play-based advocacy, which is something that we really work hard towards. Not all communities prioritize play-based learning, but when we bring in cultural practices or Tswana games and songs and stories, and we talk about how this is excellent learning or excellent examples of pedagogy, suddenly it builds our advocacy work for play-based learning and play groups as well. So we love these because these strategies make the innovation truly community built and community driven, but also we are all about scale and sustainability. So when we can use natural resources or recyclables or resources that are found in the local environment or that are culturally relevant, it further lends itself to scale and sustainability, which are two of our core values at Learn to Play. So when you're thinking about your solutions, again, I want to encourage you to think, what local elements can you highlight in your solutions? Are there stories that would explain, how we get day and night? Are there songs that will teach counting? Are there particular resources in the community that will develop children's fine motor skills? Are there traditional games that will help develop balance, coordination, and gross motor development? So if you can think about local elements that you can incorporate into your solutions. Now, this could be an informal community play group like ours, but even formal education programs. So, schools, primary schools, if you're a teacher in a primary school or in a formal preschool environment, it's still wonderful to celebrate the local culture in whatever way that you can to build that community buy-in and to make it very contextually relevant to where you're working. Our fourth step is to design with scale and sustainability in mind. And again, I think, I'll confess that we've learned this the hard way. When Learn to Play first started, it started off almost like a project, not really as a full-on organization that, we would then want to scale across the country. So what we've learned the hard way is that frameworks often lend themselves better because they are simpler. So a simpler approach rather than more complex can be adopted and adapted by all the different communities and partners and stakeholders that you're working with. And I think what's been really important for us to reflect on as we've redone our strategy is what are the non-negotiable elements of your program. So for us, for example, it's things like play. So having a play-based curriculum is non-negotiable for us. Having it cover 6 areas of development is non-negotiable for us. So a lot of early childhood programs focus on 3 or 4 areas of development. At Learn to Play, we focus on 6 of them. So those are the parts that we are not willing to change no matter where we work. But there are certainly parts of our program where we can show flexibility and allow a lot of room for contextualization to the community's needs. Sometimes it's to the venue of where we have our program. Sometimes it's about how many mothers and caregivers are involved as the lead, as the leaders of the playgroup. Sometimes our flexibility or our contextualization is to actually do with the resources that are used, because in some communities, for example, we use egg cartons. So in Gaborone, in an urban neighborhood, we use egg cartons as a sorting container. When we go into some of the rural communities, they laugh at us when we talk about egg cartons because they don't have that. They've got a chicken farm and they lay eggs, and that goes straight into their households. So there isn't a process. There's no middle process of egg cartons. So for that, they use muffin tins instead, in fact, and so for when they want to do sorters. And so the resources that we use are our negotiables, or where we can be flexible to allow for contextualization in each community. So we found that frameworks, rather than a rigid curriculum, actually lend itself to scale and sustainability, but also for large-scale caregivers who may or may not be completely educated or literate to really take this program on and drive it themselves. And so we've created a program at Learn to Play called the Rainbow Play Framework. And that's the diagram you see here with the colors of the rainbow. And I mentioned our 6 key areas of early childhood development. So these are the 6 colors. We've got red, which is social and emotional development, orange, which is fine motor development, yellow, which is language and literacy, green, which is gross motor development, blue, which is cognitive development, and purple, which is creativity and imagination. And we believe at Learn to Play that children need to grow and develop and practice skills in these 6 key areas for holistic early childhood development. So the Rainbow Play approach is actually an open source document, and later on I'll pop into the chat the website where you can download this. You can actually pop onto the website that's down there, learntoplay.org, and look for Rainbow Play approach, and it's something that you can download for yourself and keep as a PDF. And when you download it, you'll actually get the whole framework with each of these areas filled in. The sample that I'm showing you on the screen is blanked out, but it will be filled in with all the details, the early learning goals, as it says here, the play process, which is the kind of action word that you want to see children doing, and the curriculum PlayStation. This is the subject, so to speak, in the early childhood curriculum. On the outside, it says the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. That is because we've linked each of these 6 areas to an article in the UNCRC, again, reinforcing child protection, safety and security from the nurturing care framework, and how important it is for practitioners, parents, caregivers to keep those in mind as they implement. This framework is really lends itself to scale and sustainability, so much so that we know it's not just used in our playgroups. It's now used in private preschools. It's been used in hospital settings. It's been used in other countries. So by teachers in Malawi, the UK, Dubai, they're using this framework in their early childhood education settings as well. So we know that the Rainbow Play approach as a framework allows for scale. It allows for contextualization, and that's what makes it so effective. And so when we simplify, and rather than having a rigid curriculum that says, on Monday, you have to do this, or on Thursday, the 7th of October, this is your lesson plan, which actually, it can be really difficult when you're looking at community-based approaches to follow something so rigid. The Rainbow Play approach makes it a lot more scalable and adaptable to the community. What I also want to say here is I think training is key, and we put a lot of emphasis on our mamapreneur trainings. That's training the mothers and caregivers who deliver and implement our playgroups in their communities. And when we put so much emphasis on our frameworks and our training, then you don't need to be as rigid on the lesson plans and the curriculum, because you know that what's going to be happening out of it is quality early childhood play-based learning anyway, because our strength is in our training. We also have a lot of strength in our structures, routines, and our daily checklist for quality assurance. So again, when we're thinking about simplifying processes, we've got simple checklists that our mamapreneurs fill out on a daily basis as a kind of self-reflection tool to make sure that they're doing everything within our program. We've then got weekly checklists that supervisors fill out, and so on. So when we've tried to simplify our program as we've scaled, so this has been something that has been iterative and we've been learning on the go. We certainly didn't start with all of these details in place when we started our organization in 2017. We found that this is what's allowing us to scale whilst maintaining our quality standards. So it's just, you know, sharing some of the hard work and learnings that have come about from our work, so that when you are implementing programs, you can start to build with that in mind already. And then I come to our last step in our recipe, and that is to take time to reflect, to take time to evaluate on how your program is going, and to iterate. I think community work is extremely dynamic, and therefore our solutions need to be too. And I think the biggest learning for this has been COVID. So when Learn to Play started, our model was we would train mothers or caregivers in the community to run our playgroups, who we call mamapreneurs. They're mothers who we, you know, gave early childhood development training, and they started to run the playgroups in their communities as their own micro enterprise, hence the term mamapreneur. They were the ones that would enroll and engage parents in the communities. They would deal directly with community leaders and stakeholders. And so they had 100% ownership of the program. And whilst that was excellent and worked really well for a while, in COVID, when we went into lockdown in Botswana, a lot of our mamapreneurs do not have access to the internet or smartphones or WhatsApp. And suddenly our parents, who are, you know, our clients and our beneficiaries, the children themselves, were stuck in their households for weeks at a time with no interaction and no support. And so what we did as a team is we reflected on this and we thought, well, what are our program goals? Our program goals are to make sure that these children are playing and are feeling nurtured, and these families are feeling supported. And so we can't do that in a playgroup form at the moment. So how can we do it? And so that's when we started to look at what is working well and how do we need to iterate. And we came up with a mobile mentoring program where our core team, rather than our mamapreneurs, so our team who are based in the capital city of Gaborone and who do have access to internet and mobile technology, were able to communicate and connect with all our families across the country. That's over 200 families at the time. And they were connecting and calling them on a weekly basis, making sure that they understood the health information that was coming about with regards to COVID-19, the difference between quarantine and isolation, is social distancing possible in your context? Asking those kinds of questions, but then going a step further and saying, how can we support you and your family to still access play? How can we give you cost-effective or no-cost solutions to still meeting your children's play and development needs while you're stuck in lockdown? And when we started to interact with our parents in this way, we started to hear their needs directly. And I think those needs changed due to COVID. We started to understand their deepest challenges, but also their successes. And it gave us a much broader picture of our clients and the communities where we work. So that really made us kind of evaluate our program, looked at what, again, our non-negotiables were, what our areas of flexibility were, where we could develop and where we could iterate. So when we needed to change, we also had to look at, well, is this change specific to a particular community? Is it just one community experiencing these challenges, or is it program-wide? And going back to the why, does this meet our mandate? Is it fulfilling our goals? Is it still within our values? What will this do for our beneficiaries? So the children are still our ultimate goal. And I think that's why Learn to Play has changed so much. So what started off as just a purely early childhood education program with a playgroup is now a program that focuses strongly on parenting support and engagement, really focusing focusing on responsive and nurturing caregiving, that is focusing on health and nutrition, that is looking at how to extend our services and our networks in child protection. And that iteration is something that has come about due to all this reflection and evaluation work, and the pandemic has taught us that more than anything else. So I think, just going back to that community work is really dynamic, and I think, if there's one learning you leave with today, it's to leave with that feeling that you've got a growth mindset out of this rather than a fixed one, and knowing that growth mindset is what's going to enable scale and success. So that our solution in 2017 when we first started is no longer sufficient to serve our communities today, now that we know how their needs have changed. So that brings me to the end of our steps and our secret sauce, and I'm so grateful to have been able to share that with you today. So thank you once again for signing in, for taking time out of your schedules, for choosing to attend the Learn to Play session today, because there are incredible sessions on offer with World Education Week this week. I know I've attended a few of them myself and been really inspired, and still got a lot more planned for tomorrow to attend. So please do have a look at the schedule, and I'm going to hand back to Karen. Hi everybody. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Priyanka. That was awesome, and I appreciated the specificity and the questions that you posed and encouraged us to think through. I want to invite the participants again to share any questions that they may have. We have gotten one. And actually a great question about how can children both play as well as learn? In a way, it seems like multitasking when they're doing both. So is it possible for young learners to master both of these skills at the same time?
That is a great question, and actually one that we get from our communities really often. So I really appreciate you asking that. And I think, it just goes back to play is learning, especially for young children. I think it's the most powerful way to learn. And there is actually a whole spectrum of play. So we can go from free play, which is, where there's no adult intervention or interaction or no guidance from a parent, caregiver, or teacher, where the child is absolutely left to their devices and whatever resources they have access to create their own play. There is still value in that. There is still a lot of learning that comes out of that. There is creativity that comes out of that. There's problem solving that comes out of it. And it depends what the child is playing with or how they're playing in that free play, but there can be so much more that comes out of that. But there's also guided play. And I think that's where at Learn to Play we put most of our focus and attention. And that is where the caregiver or the adult in charge has actually pre-chosen a specific activity, a play-based activity, to target one of those 6 areas of development. So, for example, an adult might have pre-prepared some Play-Doh, my ultimate favorite tool and toy, and use that to help children make shapes. And through that, they're learning, the difference between a square and a rectangle and a circle, because they're molding the shapes out of Play-Doh. But they're also developing their fine motor skills while doing that. So there's free play, there's guided play. There are games, which is not guided play, because guided play is you're still trying to have the child lead it, but with the adult focusing and the adult choosing the tools or the resources that the child is playing with. Games are a bit more structured. They have specific rules, regulations. There is a clear way of what's right, what's wrong, how to win or lose. So that would be the 3rd level of play almost. And then the 4th is direct instruction, where the adult is teaching. And I think that's something that we're more used to. And even in direct instruction, there can be more playful ways of engaging and instructing a child, but it's not necessarily what the child would consider play. So those would be the 4 levels of play-based learning that I would encourage you all to think about. But just to know that across all of them, the child is learning and developing in different ways. And I think if you have access to the Rainbow Play Framework, there is a write-up about it as well, and how you can use it to facilitate learning through play through that document. If you can go onto our website and grab that as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. I think everyone is eager to go out and jump rope and play hopscotch and come up with some other games to play. I have a question actually for you. Just curious, how do you start? So how do you identify what communities you want to work in or that want to work with you? You know, do they approach you? Are there ideal attributes that you look for that kind of define a community that would be great for a playgroup?
So historically, it's kind of been quite haphazardly that we've had communities choose us or have had us choose communities. But in general, we've got a set list of criteria that even when we are approached or if we approach community that we go through with them. We first want to know how many children under the age of 5 there are in the community. So I would say we always start with that, so that we know what kind of impact we're going to be creating. And I say this because some villages or communities in Botswana have thousands of people in them, and some which are smaller settlements actually only have a couple of hundred people in the whole village. And so of that 100, there might be, you know, less than 50 children under the age of 5 in that community. So it's really important to know first how many children. We also want to know what other early childhood services exist within the community. So in some communities, there are private or other NGO or church-based early childhood education services or government ones. And so we want to make sure that we're really fulfilling a need or filling a gap in that community before we actually go in there with a solution. We also don't want to be competing with any other service provider there. That's not what Learn to Play is about. We are there to fill a gap and fulfill a need. And so if there isn't a need for us or if there isn't a gap, then we don't necessarily need to be in that community. We could definitely use our resources and skills in other areas of a bigger need. We also, want to make sure that early childhood development is on the VDC's priority. So the VDC, as I mentioned before, is the Village Development Committee, and each community in Botswana has one of these. So they do have to give a 5-year strategic plan to the government, and only if ECD has been highlighted as a priority area would it make sense to partner with that VDC and go into that community. So those are some of the things we look for. Once those bits are settled, we've got another set of processes that we look for to find the right caregivers and mamapreneurs, the right venue for where we work in that community, and so on.
Thanks so much. All right, another question, kind of on how to adapt the model. So have you ever gotten feedback, whether kind of positive or negative, from the community once the playgroup has started, that you've needed to perhaps adapt the model, and how did you go about that process?
Yeah, I think we started, and it was interesting timing. So in January 2020, we started a playgroup in a San Bushman community in the Kalahari Desert of Botswana, so in a village called Cocreate. And we only had about 2 months of running normal playgroup before, COVID hit and we went into lockdowns. But even then, in those 2 months, we started to get feedback from parents to say, how can we make this more culturally relevant to that specific community? And certainly since we reopened last August, that has been kind of consistent feedback from village leaders and parents who really want to preserve their indigenous culture and heritage, often, the Bushman life and their stories, their language, their songs, and their culture through the curriculum. So that's been really, I would say, really exciting feedback. I don't know if it's either positive or negative, but they just want to see more of it in the playgroup. So it's hard for us because they speak a totally different language as well. They don't speak Setswana, and they certainly don't speak English. So when we want to, really get detailed feedback of how we can incorporate this in, that's taking a lot of research and community engagement to get there. But we are working hard at it. So I think that's been one. But it goes back to the presentation of really understanding what the community needs and how you can celebrate the local culture in your community to build that buy-in.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, I think we just have time for one more question. So this goes back to when you had mentioned how Learn to Play is a social enterprise, and that you have a paid preschool for-profit that helps subsidize and pay for the community playgroups. So this question is curious, if do you follow the same model in both the paid preschool as well as the community playgroups? And what differences do you see between the two environments of children from these different communities?
I love that question because it's something I'm thinking about all the time. And I don't know if I have a full answer to it, but I can at least share with you what my thoughts are because it is something that's always on my mind. I will say that the rainbow play approach we use at the preschool as well as in all our play groups. So that governs and defines our structure, our developmental goals, the outcomes that we're hoping for children to meet, how we assess children, how we report back to parents. That framework is everything and is identical in both contexts, the private program as well as the community one. And then the themes that we teach. So we've got, typical preschool themes: space, wild animals, all around the world, the circus, and all those kinds of preschool themes that you would learn at a preschool kind of anywhere in the world. Those themes are pretty much identical, again, in the private context as well as in the community context. We give our teachers, the private preschool, we give our teachers the complete freedom and flexibility to design lesson plans within these themes and within the rainbow play approach. So I would say that's the biggest difference in the private preschool environment as well as in the community one, because in the community playgroups, we give suggested activities and resources to our mamapreneurs so that they're not lesson planning themselves. So, for example, if we've got our theme of wild animals, we'll give them, about 50, a bank of about 50 different activities in the theme of wild animals to choose from so that they can pick and choose and teach around those activities covering the rainbow play framework. Whereas at the private school, because we're working with qualified teachers with, degrees in early childhood who really take pride and pleasure in their own lesson planning, they create their own activities and resources. So, those would be the biggest differences. In terms of the learning goals and outcomes, we're, very in a very qualitative way, I think we can see that we are, achieving very similar learning milestones with the children and developmental milestones. I think obviously in terms of development, there's a huge variance in access to nutrition and healthcare and the kind of household environments that the children in the private school are growing up in versus in the communities. And so that obviously plays an impact in their overall assessments along with the curriculum.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so I'm just gonna try to wrap up everything that we've heard and learned today because it's been so much. And so let me just remind kind of the listeners what we heard. So we, in general, we had heard about the 5 kind of ingredients, I think, for impact with these community-based playgroups. Priyanka talked about human-centered design and really the need for this model to be kind of co-created with the community. So with Learn to Play, before they even begin a playgroup, they hold focus groups with the community leaders and the parents and the relevant partners, and really talk about their priorities overall for the community and their cultural values. We talked about starting with children and parents in mind. We learned about the importance of defining success with parents and trying to incorporate these priorities into the educational programming. Ultimately, this will give it a higher chance of, I think, engagement and impact. Priyanka shared the nurturing care framework that you could use as a tool for parent and child engagement. We also talked about incorporating the local culture, practices, and wisdom. Every community and culture has, traditional cultural practices, games, songs, and stories. And so utilizing and leveraging and adapting these tools can be an incredibly powerful platform for early childhood development. And along these lines goes with designing for scale and sustainability. So we talked about simpler approaches rather than more complex ones, that it can be easily adopted and adapted by the communities and partners. And one of the frameworks that Priyanka and the Learn to Play team have adopted is the Learn to Play framework, which can really be contextualized. And we also talked about the importance of training here. And then finally, the importance of reflection, iteration, and evaluation. All of our work is dynamic, and so the solutions really need to be too. What works maybe in one setting might not work in another, so there needs to be a point that we sit back and reflect and think about what is working and what's not, and having this growth mindset rather than being kind of fixated perhaps into what we're currently doing. Awesome. And with that, I again want to reiterate a huge note of gratitude for everyone who has been listening and participating in the conversation. Thank you so much for your questions. I encourage you to find out more from the Learn to Play website, which is learntoplay.org. Definitely want to thank our speaker, Priyanka, the back-end team, our producer, yeah, all of the team behind this that put together the World Education Week team, the Learn to Play team, the board, all the mompreneurs, and most importantly, I think all the parents and children who make this such a success. All right, and with that, I'll turn it back over to finish off the panel presentation. Thank you guys so much.
Join Time Magazine's lead education reporter alongside global educators and advocates to explore the impacts of teaching forgiveness.
I teach forgiveness because it can have a positive impact in my students' families.
It helps my students thrive in the face of adversity.
Students who can forgive are happier.
Join us to hear from teachers and thought leaders on how and why to include forgiveness in your classroom.
Temperature rise will bring widespread devastation and unprecedented extreme weather.
New coronavirus cases emerge across the country.
Obesity rates have more than doubled in kids.
Cape Town is running out of water.